Randy, you're laughing here. It's like arguing with the ref, I guess, right? There's some arguments you're going to win. Even if you're right, you're not going to win that argument.
Yeah, you definitely have to pick your fights sometimes.
Exactly. Well, listen, man, it's so good to see you in studio. Thank you for coming down.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And we talk about the world of MMA and Ultimate Fighting and the sportsman world. There really is a tremendous amount of crossover, I think.
Absolutely. I think traditionally the combative sports, especially, are blue-collar sports, and I think being in the woods, being in the outdoors, and that lifestyle is part of how a lot of us grew up.
Yeah, is that how you grew up?
Absolutely. The
Yeah?
Pacific Northwest in Seattle. My dad started taking me hunting when I was 5 years old.
Really?
And, yeah.
That's cool. And I love the fact that it always goes back to family, it seems. The lessons that you learn from a dad or from grandfather out there in the field, and you carry those lessons with you.
Absolutely. I think there's just something about being out, being with your dad and learning how to survive the cold, the wet, as it was in Seattle.
Right.
Yeah, I can remember being in the woods and being soaking wet and having freezing feet, and him taking my shoes and socks off, and I thought he was nuts. But he put them on his chest and he rubbed them until they were warm again, and then took the sandwich bags and put those on my feet before he put my socks back on, and I was warm and dry the rest of the day. I would have never thought of it.
And it's cool because those little tips like that, the ways that you can go, 5 more minutes or another hour when you think that you've reached the limits of your exhaustion. Again, I mean, take it back to MMA, and a big part of this is working through yourself, fighting yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have those barriers. You think you're done and you're ready to quit, and that's where I think a lot of times your teammates and a good coach come in. Even though it's an individual sport, wrestling was that way too. Your coaches encouraged you and pushed you to push that barrier back, to go a little further, a little harder than you thought you could go, and that builds confidence. You realize, man, I was ready. I thought it was done, and I went another 45 minutes. That surprised me. So
Right.
I think it's about pushing that barrier back all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so cool that you see this this carryover throughout the world of MMA. We're going to be talking later this week with Steve Ranella, the host of Meat Eater, who took Joe Rogan and Brian Callen out on an elk hunt, and I got to talk to Rogan a little bit about it, and he's telling you, it's freezing cold, it's horrible, but he was like, you're so excited, you're so in the moment there, and again, whether it's the guy across from you, or whether it's that elk that you've been chasing for 3 or 4 days, or that whitetail, or that feral hog, it is that combative sport, I guess, as you put it, and that's where that similarity maybe really starts to take root. I got to ask, I mean, when you started out, you said you started out hunting when you were 5. How did you start out wrestling? How old were you when you started wrestling?
I started wrestling when I was 10. My best friend's older brothers wrestled, the Stevenson boys up in Linwood. And we were going to a junior high school district tournament to watch them compete. And they thought it was funny. They threw Bobby and I in the tournament, in the novice division. Neither one of us had ever wrestled a day in our lives.
Oh, wow.
And I got my first headlock and my first bloody nose. And I rolled into junior high school as a 7th grader the next year. And the gym teacher was also the wrestling coach, Coach Casebeer. And he said, "Wrestling starts on Monday. I'll see you there." And I mean, that turned out, and I've been wrestling ever since.
That's amazing. You wrestled at Oklahoma State, Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I was a cowboy for 4 years.
I love that. I love that. You got good memories of those times?
Absolutely. Amazing place. I spent 6 years in the Army.
Yeah.
And got scholarship offers out of the Army. I was a alternate on the 88 wrestling team as a soldier. And I don't think most college coaches knew who I was until then. And then the phone started ringing, and I took a visit to Okie State, and I mean, they were getting ready for the World Championships, actually the 88 games that summer.
Okay.
And I saw some of the guys that I'd been watching wrestle and win medals training in that room, and I realized that was a place for me.
That's awesome. What has been your driving motivation throughout your career? I mean, is it something intangible? Can you even put it in words?
Well, it's something I've tried to figure out. I think I started wrestling to get my dad's attention. My dad wasn't around or very often. In fact, the only times I did see him was once a year. He'd come and take me hunting for a week. That was one of the few times I got to spend any real time with him. So I think that alone made hunting and being in the outdoors special to me. And then I knew he was a wrestler. He wrestled in high school. He wrestled a little bit in the Navy, and so I think I gravitated towards the sport simply because of that. I thought maybe it would get his attention. He'd be around a little more, and it turned out it was the right thing for me. And I ended up winning a state title by the time I graduated high school, and it led me to service and college scholarship and all those things. So.
You talk about your time in the Army, 101st, right?
101st Airborne, Fort Campbell, air assault soldier. It was from 19 to 25 years old. It was a pretty formative time in my life, and I think I learned a lot about work ethic, and discipline that my mother had started with me as a single parent, and it carried over through the combative sport of wrestling and then the Army.
It's cool that you talk about I also grew up broken home. Mom was a single parent, and we hear a lot of cultural critics say, single parents can't do a good job of raising kids. Look, it's tough. I'm not going to deny it is tough to be a single mom, but there's absolutely no way that I will buy into the fact or the argument that you can't raise a good kid as a single mom or as a single dad.
I can't buy that either. I lived it. I have two sisters, both younger than I was the oldest. And sure, I think I had a lot more responsibilities than maybe the average 11, 12, 13-year-old kid walking around that had two younger sisters, and mom was working two jobs. But we got it done, and my mom worked her butt off to keep us clothed and keep us into things that we really needed. And I think that's why those wrestling coaches were so important to me. Those were those father figures,
right?
The guys I looked up to, the guys that taught me that discipline. Some of my neighbors, guys that I later had a stepdad that we hunted with, and I remember Mr. Baggerly. I don't know how many times he fixed my car. Those were the guys you go to. And Dad wasn't there. So it was definitely I had a core group of friends that were very, very important and instrumental, I think, in me staying on track and never using those sorts of things as an excuse to be something else or do something wrong.
Have you sort of taken over that role in some regards as you've gotten older? Are you now the father figure type to some younger guys?
I think that has been a hat that I've had to put on. Sometimes you feel like chief cook and counselor and travel agent and all kinds of things for some of these guys you end up coaching. And certainly in college wrestling, I coached at Oregon State for a while, and you wear a lot of hats in that position. And coaching is something I feel like I've always had an affinity for and just enjoyed. And now in mixed martial arts, running Extreme Couture, the gym in Vegas, you have a chance to affect a lot of young guys that aspire to be the places you've been.
Absolutely. We're talking with Randy Couture here on NRA News Cam and Company. We've got Randy for another segment. But before we go, let's tease into the next segment here. Favorite? Do you have a favorite hunt that you've been on? One that stands out in your mind recently?
Man, I've been chasing. You mentioned elk, and I've been chasing elk since I was a kid, and really, especially in archery, for over 20 years, and I had yet to shoot an elk until this last year. And I went muzzleloader hunting down in New Mexico with G3 Outfitters down there by Socorro, and had an amazing time and shot my first bull elk this year. So that's definitely one to remember.
Right now in studio with us, Randy the Natural Couture. And Randy, thanks for sticking around another segment.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So you were telling us about this elk that you got for 20 years. You've been chasing elk around the country.
And been very, very close. I have some property in Colorado, hunt there a lot. And been very, very close. Obviously with archery, you have to get fairly close. And I kind of was exposed to a new muzzleloader. I'd never had a muzzleloader or done that type of hunting, and took that out hunting this year down in New Mexico, and was fortunate enough to get a good shot and get a nice big bull elk of 6x6. So,
nice.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's very cool. Now you talked about your dad taking you hunting. Are you passing these traditions on to your kids as well?
I have taken both my older children hunting, and at times they didn't seem to gravitate to it the same way that I did.
Right.
My youngest is turning 10, and he is fired up to go hunting. He inherited the shotgun that I got from my father when I was 12 years old. I gave that to him this year, and he's just turning 10. We've shot that, and he's learning to shoot a 22 in Colorado. And you talked about the backyard range. We have some targets set up in the backyard there with a nice mountain as a backdrop.
Oh,
and,
nice.
and he really seems to enjoy it. And he's fired up to go turkey hunting. So
Oh
he's got a
yeah,
call. He's got all that. So we're going to try and get him out turkey hunting here real soon.
that's very cool. And it must be, it's so different when you do it when you come at it from a father as opposed to, when you're the kid. I mean, when you're the one who's now, you got to be thinking about, do you think back about, okay, here's what my dad did, and here's what, I can tweak this a little bit. I can do these things. You gotta pass on those family traditions, but you got to make some stuff your own too, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll probably be a little less concerned about Caden snapping a stick or some of the things my dad was pretty worried about when I was a kid. But I ultimately I think we'll get out and we'll have fun. He did go archery hunting with me this last year in Colorado for elk. We didn't see any, but we had a great hike and a great time out in the woods.
That's one of the things that people who and I'm not a lifelong hunter. I did not grow up in a hunting family, so this is something that I've been learning more about as I'm an adult. But one of the very first things I learned is that hunting is not actually about getting the animal. Hunting is about hunting, just as fishing is not about getting the fish. Fishing is about fishing, right?
Yeah, there's something about being out there, being by yourself. You never felt so small in your entire life, but at the same time, you never felt so alive as you do. Just kind of being at one with nature and kind of takes you back to the way things maybe used to be before you could just go to the grocery store and buy what it is you wanted to buy for food. And it kind of realized just how hardy and how tough some of the settlers were that settled this country and were the pioneers here.
Absolutely. Now listen, man, when the MMA guy, when Randy Couture is talking about how tough our forefathers used to be, you know that our forefathers were tough. Let's talk about the world of MMA and UFC if we can for just a couple of minutes. You now have a gym in Las Vegas, right?
I've had a gym there for 6 years, Extreme Couture, and we've got a ton of top fighters going through there. Martin Kampman and Evan Dunham are training there right now, are both top MMA guys. My son, Ryan, is fighting in the UFC now and just had his first UFC debut and has had 8 pro fights now and is doing very well. Kind of came through our amateur system at Extreme Couture and making his way in the pros.
That's awesome. We're seeing in terms of the hunting numbers, we saw a number of years where the number of hunters was going down. Now that's actually starting to reverse course. Hunting is, I think, a growing sport. Where do you see MMA and UFC going, let's say, over the next, 5 or 10 years?
Well, obviously, I think MMA is become a global phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just limited to kind of the hotspots, which were Brazil, Japan, and then the U.S. for the last 20 years, but it's spread everywhere now. It's obviously huge in the U.K., but we're even seeing fights in Dubai, fights in Australia. The European market is really, really developing. We just had fights in Sweden, and it's been a long time sport there, but just, I think, starting to explode and be recognized there too. So I think it's just solidifying itself, mixed martial arts is, as the combative sport for this generation that we're in right now.
You grew up wrestling in junior high. I suppose we had the gold gloves, but as far as like sanctioned, youth outreach, what is there for for MMA?
I think that's the place where we probably still need to see some more growth is a national governing body and sanctioning body especially for the youth, for the amateurs. There's a ton of amateur shows being thrown all over the country, but and a lot of the athletic commissions still regulate the amateur sport, even though they're more notorious for regulating the professionals and the promoters in the professional sport.
Right.
So I think there's a small void there, I think, with regard to regulation on the amateur level.
And do you run up against the sort of the helicopter parent attitude of, oh, this is too dangerous for my child?
Well, I think that's the thing. It's become acceptable where it was largely a closet sport. We're surprised when people came out of the woodwork and said they were fans of it. Now it's widely accepted. And because it's okay with mom and dad now, and they love to watch it on TV and they get it, they see the tactics, the technique, the dedication, all those character building things that come from a combative sport like mixed martial arts. It's okay with them now. So the clubs, like my club, the kids club is our fastest growing part of the club. Is Junior's coming in now, and he's learning arm bars, and he's learning grappling technique, and he's learning striking and kickboxing and the wrestling stuff that goes with mixed martial arts. So some of those stars are hitting the pro scene now that grew up watching me and saying
Right.
that's what I want to be, and they didn't care about a belt or anything else. They just wanted to be a mixed martial artist, and some of those kids that are coming out now are pretty amazing.
That's cool, and it's actually cool that you have the buy-in from parents. Because I got to tell you, I mean, you read the headlines today. I would think that you would have parents protesting your gym every day. Keep our delicate snowflakes away from MMA.
Yeah, and that's all fun and games until they get bullied at school, and now they've from 8 to 12 years old, they've been training in mixed martial arts. They realize they have nothing to prove, but when push comes to shove, they're going to be able to handle themselves. So I think, especially with bullying being a big issue nowadays, putting them in a martial arts program of some sort is a great way to handle some of that.
Absolutely. Well, again, I mean, it goes back to what we started this conversation with. You get the discipline. It's just like learning to be a responsible gun owner. If you're in a junior shooter or a junior shooting league, I've yet to meet the irresponsible, junior air rifle shooter. I just haven't. I'm sure maybe one of them's out there, but I've not met that person. You get these young individuals and you get them involved in something that does teach them responsibility, that does teach them discipline, where they can see the progress and the growth that they're making. And man, I mean, that's so much better than just giving someone a trophy for participating, isn't
Well,
it?
and they recognize the power that they hold, not only within themselves as a martial artist, but whatever they're holding in their hands. In the case of teaching a young person the right and wrong end of a weapon.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Randy, it's such a pleasure to have you in studio, man. Keep up everything you're doing. And
Thanks.
I hope you'll come back at some point.
Yeah, having a blast, and I appreciate you having me on.